You know, in the history of war, some of the absolute bloodiest battles have been fought over the tiniest pieces of land. Today, we're diving into one of those clashes from the Korean War, a totally brutal 10-day fight for one single treeless peak that came to be known as White Horse Hill. And that really brings us to the staggering question at the heart of this whole story. How does one little hill, just 395 meters high, become the center of a conflict so unbelievably intense that it leads to over 14,000 casualties in just 10 days? Let's find out. So, to really get a grip on the human cost, we first have to understand the strategic stakes. For the UN forces, this was the hill that they absolutely, under no circumstances, could let fall. Okay, so the battle was fought inside this key strategic zone called the Iron Triangle, which was a major transportation hub. And Hill 395, the one that would later be called White Horse Hill, was the absolute linchpin. It basically controlled the valley and all the western routes into the vital city of Chirwan. For the United Nations forces, losing this hill just wasn't an option. A defeat here would have triggered a huge withdrawal, leaving the whole Chirwan road network wide open. It would have created a catastrophic hole in the UN defensive line. The stakes really couldn't have been higher. Now, here's a twist. The battle didn't actually start with a bang, but with a betrayal. Right before the assault, a really dramatic event gave the UN a critical life-saving advantage, a warning that came from deep inside the enemy's own ranks. This was a stunning intelligence coup. On October 3rd, 1952, just a few days before the attack was supposed to happen, a Chinese lieutenant defected. He literally walked over to the UN lines with this incredible warning. A massive attack on Hill 395 was coming, and it was coming soon. And that warning? It was a total game changer. The UN command scrambled, rushing to reinforce the South Korean 9th Division, who were defending the hill. They threw everything they had at it: American tanks, heavy artillery, rocket launchers, even anti-aircraft guns that they repurposed for ground combat. They got searchlights and flare planes ready for night fighting and put the U.S. 5th Air Force on high alert. A storm was coming, and they were getting ready for it. And boy, did that storm arrive with unimaginable force. What came next was a 10-day bloody seesaw, just a relentless, brutal, back-and-forth fight for control of that one peak. The fighting was just pure chaos. On October 9th, Chinese forces stormed the crest and took it. A day later, the South Koreans took it back in a ferocious night assault. At one point, the hill changed hands multiple times in a single 24-hour period. This vicious cycle of attack and counterattack just kept going until the 14th, when South Korean forces finally secured the hill for good. A captured Chinese soldier gave this chilling first-hand account of the intensity. He said many of the companies were reduced from 190 to 200 men to less than 20 men after the second day of fighting. Just think about that. That's a casualty rate of nearly 90% in just 2 days. Unbelievable. So, why was it so brutal? Well, a lot of it came down to this fundamental clash of military doctrines. The Chinese forces relied on these massive infantry assaults, basically human waves sent right into the meat grinder. The UN forces, on the other hand, countered with their biggest advantage: overwhelming firepower from artillery, tanks, and aircraft, all designed to just obliterate those waves before they could even get close. And the scale of that firepower it's just immense. In only 9 days, Chinese forces fired over 55,000 shells onto that one small hill. But the UN response was even bigger. South Korean artillery fired back with over 185,000 shells. That's more than 3 times the volume. And that doesn't even count the air power. On top of all that artillery, the U.S. 5th Air Force dropped more than 2,700 bombs, plus hundreds of napalm canisters. The amount of explosives concentrated on this one little piece of land is almost impossible to comprehend. So after the shelling finally stopped and the guns went silent, it was time to count the devastating and, as it turns out, highly disputed human cost: the price of the peak. As is so common in the fog of war, the casualty reports conflict wildly. You have South Korean sources claiming over 14,000 Chinese casualties versus about 3,400 of their own. Then, Chinese sources flip that narrative completely, claiming far fewer losses. While we'll probably never know the exact truth, the one undeniable fact is that thousands upon thousands of lives were extinguished on those slopes. So how did Hill 395 get its famous name? Well, first, that relentless, round-the-clock bombardment completely stripped the hill of all its trees and vegetation. Then, the constant explosions blasted and scarred the bare earth, turning it into this pale, skeletal shape. People who saw it said the final result looked like a threadbare white horse, and the name just stuck. And the legacy of that heroic defense lives on. The South Korean 9th Infantry Division, which took the brunt of all that fighting, earned a new nickname that they carry with incredible honor to this day, the White Horse Division. But the legacy of this battle isn't just something you find in history books. There are still echoes from White Horse Hill that you can feel even today. Get this, as recently as 2020, the remains of soldiers killed in this very battle were still being recovered from the soil. We're talking nearly 70 years later, and the Earth is still giving up its dead. It's such a powerful reminder that the Korean War never officially ended, and its scars are still very, very fresh. The Battle of White Horse Hill was just one brutal fight in a conflict people often call the Forgotten War. And it really leaves us with one final haunting question. How many other stories of incredible courage, sacrifice, and tragedy from this war are still out there, buried, just waiting to be told?